Wonderful to be with everyone. I'm assuming that the music maybe has stopped playing now, but I suppose let us know in the chat if it hasn't. Yeah, Craig and I are thrilled to be here and participate in ThinkyCon. Thank you all. We're calling from Minneapolis, Minnesota, US. So who are we? We are researchers, learning scientists, and we are interested in failure. Other words for this are obstacles, impasses, stuck points, breakdowns, errors, problems, puzzles, incompatibilities, discrepancies, on and on. There are so many words for these moments, and we're interested in how that moment shapes learning. We've been looking at this in a range of contexts: mathematics, tutoring, computer programming, families playing outdoors, a range of video games and play-based settings. And over the last few years, we have been teaming up to study Baba is You. And that is what we will be chatting about today. We have a much bigger team of folks who've contributed to this work along the way. This is just some of them, and all of their wisdom has really shaped this work, and we're grateful for the collaboration. All right, play and learning. This is preaching to the choir here, but play is a very generative context for learning. On the other hand, the reasons for that generativity are not fully known. There's allusions in the literature and in practice to flow, to the conversations that happen during play, to just the intrinsically motivating quality of games that hook you and keep you in there, to the notion that skills develop over time. There is the recognition that feedback is provided very quickly in a game, and the recognition that play frames failure very beautifully. I think these are all components of why games are great for learning. But what Craig and I have looked at is this like failure moment, this impasse moment. Here, Baba's trying to get through a wall to get to the flag and has gotten stuck. And in play, when that failure happens, you engage in problem solving, and learning emerges from that. And we've been really trying to describe that process. So how do you study this? There's a long history of research on problem solving and a recent history. And the framework that we use is a relatively simple one. It recognizes the open-endedness of problem solving. We're really building on work that comes from studies of debugging. So when a programmer is coding, they have to notice that something has gone wrong, that there's a discrepancy between what they want and what's actually happening. Then they might try to explain that discrepancy. What in my code is causing that problem? You've all done this. If you've debugged before, then you might intervene to try to fix it. It's a relatively simple way to think about this, but there's open-endedness to each of these components, and it really helps us study problem solving in puzzle games. If you'll bear with me a bit further, we'll stick with the coding world for a moment. So this is in Pixelbots. A student has written code on the right in JavaScript to control the way this panda moves and paints through this grid. To make this really clear, debugging or problem solving starts with noticing a discrepancy. The panda has missed painting the faded red line that's in the background. You could describe this in a few ways. Once you've noticed that discrepancy, the coder might search for a cause, right? They might look at their code and say, oh, it was actually, the turn left command that caused the panda to miss, or it might be the actual grid square that the panda landed on, which is going to set you up to intervene. You might turn the panda a different direction so it paints right to left, or you might actually accept the way it's painting and just move it to a different starting point. It's the connection between these three that really is happening during debugging. And we've sort of written about this in a recent piece, if you'd like to take a look, to really capture the open-endedness of this process. I want to show you what this looks like in one other setting outside of a puzzle game. Here's a family playing outdoors. The kiddo climbs to the end of this picnic table. And you might be able to see it highlighted here, this yellow rope. So Ray, the child, first has to notice a discrepancy that she can't reach the rope. And she immediately formulates a plan. She turns toward mom and says, can you give me the rope? Can you give me the rope? As mom walks over, what's really striking is that mom begins actually reasoning causally about why this discrepancy arose. Mom says, well, I moved the table back, so you won't be able to reach it. What mom is saying is that she had actually moved this picnic bench back so that the other sibling wouldn't hit their head on it while they were swinging on the rope. Very reasonable. So what does Ray say? Ray just says, but I want to, right? Emphasizing this discrepancy, really saying, I don't care about the cause. I want to get to that rope. Mom says, all right, I'll move it back over, just hop off. Ray says, yay, yay, discrepancy vanquished. That's a little moment of problem solving in this family's journey. And you can see a few more examples of this in Justin Baker's piece, Impasses in the Wild. So what does this look like in Baba, and how does this help us understand what's going on here? This is the changeless level, and you'll see right at the beginning that flag in the middle. As soon as you move, it turns into a rock. And here's a player Aya, who says, oh, and raises their eyebrows. Very first moment, they're noticing a discrepancy. And then Aya describes it in the next moment, says, okay, flag turned into rock. They're actually being a little more specific about what the discrepancy is. They immediately intervene, right? They revise their approach. They climb down and break off rock, and their eyes widen again. Another discrepancy, the rock did not convert back to a flag, and now they provide a causal explanation. I can't change that because it's gone. It's not actually, at this point, like an accurate causal explanation in the Baba universe, but they're in their early stages of playing this game and sorting it through. And it's a little moment where you can see like learning about the mechanics seeping into their play. So why did we choose to study Baba? For folks who've played the game, it resembles writing code. Players are interacting with explicit rules, and that makes their process unusually visible for research. A beautiful context for looking at thinking and problem solving. There's also minimal consequences for failing. You just rewind. The game doesn't sort of punish you in any dramatic way. You don't need any prior content knowledge. And what's really neat is that the goal is variable, right? You don't always pursue the thing that RV has sort of set out at the outset of a puzzle to tell you to pursue. You might have to redefine that win condition. And then, again, preaching to the choir, we just absolutely love this game. RV built something amazing. We have been so fortunate to get to study it for a couple of years. So to sort of propose float the research question that we focused on. So how do players, we're going to look at middle schoolers and college students of Baba Is You, how do they notice and respond to these discrepancies during play in ways that foster their learning? 13 middle schoolers, 12 college students participated. They hadn't played Baba Is You. They played on Zoom for 3 one-hour sessions, and they thought aloud as they played, as if they were streaming their gameplay. And we didn't intervene unless the participants needed help. We examined data across all the players. And for this first analysis that I'm going to show you, we wanted to pick some levels where they were sort of a little deeper into the game and had understood the basics, where they were grappling with new mechanics and solving the letters in these levels in about 5 minutes. We didn't want to bite off more than we could chew. Float and changeless really met those criteria beautifully. We transcribed those levels. It takes a lot of time to transcribe all of the talk and action and whatnot. And then we use the method called interaction analysis, where you look at like talk and movement and interaction with the game. And we looked at sort of sequences of action. So I'll show you that data right in a moment. This is the float level. It looks like the very first level of Baba, but what the twist here is that when you get to the flag, you don't actually win, and players are disoriented. They're like, what's going on? I don't understand why I wouldn't win. Oh, there's this Baba's float tucked in the corner. Baba must be floating. You got to figure out how to solve it. And then here's changeless, which we just looked at. When you analyze players across these two levels, so changeless is on the left and float is on the right, you'll see this is sort of sequences of actions, what actions follow each other. And the left is the first action, and then the right is the next action. You'll see the constructs that I've introduced to you, like noticing discrepancies, causal explanations, and revising or intervening. And you'll see the ones and the twos and threes. The ones mean like if you notice a discrepancy, you just raise your eyebrows and you're like, oh, darn. But a noticing discrepancy at like a 2 or a 3 level means you describe it, right? You're actually saying what is discrepant relative to what you wanted. Same with causal explanations. If you provide a detailed causal explanation, that would be a 2 or a 3. What you can see already from this visualization is that there's a lot of tinkering just happening all over the place. Players notice discrepancies, and then they revise their approach. And after revising their approach, the game's quite hard, so you notice another discrepancy. And it's that underlying churn that's really nice to just recognize about puzzle solving that we found quite striking. But I want to draw your attention to like a difference between these two levels. If you think about float, when you walk over that flag and you don't win, players are disoriented and they're curious. And you can see so many actually go to generate a causal explanation. Like they actually really explain why the flag is not, winning the game at that moment. The other hand, when in changeless, when that flag turns into a rock, people just want the flag back. They don't actually try to explain as often why the flag converted to a rock. And it's really striking, just given the knowledge that they've accrued about the game and how that level is designed, that it's sort of nurturing sort of more immediate tinkering. Like, let's just go right to changing something. The other thing you can see here is that players are infusing their knowledge about the mechanics when they explain why this discrepancy arose, and they're doing it when they're revising their approach. These like revisions that are at the 2 and 3 level, players are saying why they think the thing they're going to change is going to work. And those are two ways that we see learning just like deeply infused in puzzle solving here. So overall, you might call float a level that nurtures like attribution-driven problem solving, where you really understand why the problem has arisen, and that sort of fuels your next actions. Whereas changeless is a little more intervention-driven problem solving. Something's gone wrong, and I'm going to make a change and see how the world reacts. This is great. There's a nice starting point to recognize that levels can sort of send you in these two directions. But what I want to show you next is a different thread from this work where we looked at impasses across the first 6 levels of Baba Is You. Basil on our team has been leading this work absolutely beautifully. And I asked if he would be open for me giving a sneak peek of the work, and he was very excited about that. So all credit to Basil, and this is really exciting work, so we're going to get to share it today. So the question that we asked here is, how are players encountering these impasses across the early levels of the game? We used a relatively large sample here of 180 players. And I want to call attention to the very narrow definition of impasse that we're using here. We're looking at just moments when players encounter an object that like blocks their forward movement. There's plenty of other ways that you get stuck in Baba Is You. There's plenty of other discrepancies, to put it in our terms. But we just wanted to focus on one, just this like impasse blocking your progress. And we use log data. We are using a research version of Baba Is You that logs all of the actions in the game and the timestamps. It's unbelievably helpful, and we really thank Arvi for the collaboration to make this possible. It's been an absolute treasure to work with. So try to guess what you think happens on level 1. Here's Baba. The player at this point has played 1 level where they just sort of walk to the flag. No one really does much, but they understand that you have to get to the flag. What do you think happens here? Just sort of take a moment to guess. If you played the game, you might remember what you did. 38% of the players run into the wall, right? They're trying to walk to the flag. They crash into the wall. 23% of the players either like break the rule and then reform it or restart the level at some point, but they eventually, with a delay, they do hit that impasse. They do hit the wall. 1% of the players do something a little more creative, like push wall as stop up. And you'll see why we sort of are calling that out as a separate factor here. But surprisingly, 38% of the players don't hit the wall at all. And this is what really struck us. We'd seen it like qualitatively in a few cases, but we weren't sure how widespread it was. And it was really striking. So you'll see this sort of graphic come up, right? This is like 38% pure impasse, 23% hit it with a delay, and 38% had no impasse. How about level 2? Now you're the wall. It's an echo of the first level. What do you think happens here? So now we have 62% of players are hitting the flags, right? Maybe they think the flags are going to win, or maybe they're bumping into it for the first time. 6% with delay. No one does anything sort of cheeky here with like layering of these elements. And 32% don't hit the impasse at all. Where you really get your bang for your buck is looking across these two. So let's just look at these 70 players who don't hit the wall on level 1. 37 of them on level 2 go to hit the flags, right? And what's really neat is there's like some trust that RV has like established in the player where, well, you might miss it here, but on the second level, you get a very similar puzzle and you get a chance to experience that friction and learn that same mechanic if perhaps you missed it here. Meanwhile, 20 of the players who hit the wall on the first level are sort of now perhaps aware of that impasse and are avoiding it, right, in level 2. It was really striking to see the flow between these. Here you can look across the 6 levels. There's so much complexity in here. And I know this talk will be recorded, so feel welcome to pull this up and dig in and share your thoughts with us on what you're seeing. But I'm just going to call out a couple of things. Look at level 4, how many, what percentage of players are experiencing a layered impasse. It's this level. And at this point, they've understood that like skull is defeat. You don't want to touch those skulls. What they're doing is they put a rock on the skulls and they see if the rock might, explode the skull. Or many actually see if it can work as a bridge to walk across, and they end up dying. They hit the skulls, right? They experience the impasse, but it's a recognition of the player's creativity and learning, right? They're not just walking into those skulls in a sort of pure impasse way that we'd seen earlier. Similarly, one really exciting thing is on level 6, 72% of the players hit these rocks, right? They're defined as rock as stop. And you might think like, why are they doing that? What's going on? They should know at this point. But at all previous levels, the rocks have been pushable. And all of a sudden now they serve as a wall, and RV's enticing players to really try to get to these elements here. And it's one more way that they're learning the fundamentals of this game by crashing into that rock. Now, we're limited with the log data, right? You can hear them sort of guessing at what players are thinking. We can see they've hit an impasse, but what we really need to know is what did they do before the impasse and how are they responding afterwards? How are they thinking about it? And if you actually look at what players are saying, you can really get much more granular here. You can see that players might encounter the impasse, but like not even notice it. They might just background it, or they might investigate the cause, or they might apply an intervention. They might reinvestigate it, reinvestigate the cause, reapply an intervention, sort of trying things multiple times. Or there's a very different set of things that might happen. The player might actually be seeking out that impasse. They might be testing something very different from the first set of categories. Or it might be a slip. It's just like an accidental move that the player corrects. Or if they don't encounter the impasse, there's a couple of options. They might have intentionally avoided it, or they might have just missed it, right? Like happened to solve the puzzle without noticing why. And when you look across all of the levels, I just want to note a couple of things. This is 4 middle schoolers, 4 college students. On level 1 and 2, you can see players grappling with the impasses. They're investigating them. They're reapplying the strategies that they've learned. They're really digging into it. But as you get to levels 3 and 4, you can see sort of some new things happening. There's a lot of avoidance. Players recognize the impasses. They're trying to sort of steer clear of them. They're even doing a little bit of testing. As you get to level 6, when all of these players crashed into the rocks, now we have a much better sense of what players are doing. They're testing it. They're testing it, testing. They recognize that it's very unlikely that they'll be able to pass through, but they're going to try anyway and check their assumption. And what this really tells us is that we have to be cautious when we use that log data. We could guess what players are thinking, but just by seeing that they've gotten stuck doesn't really tell you what's happened. If we call it failure, that's probably not going to be the right word. It's going to be too heavy, or it might be too light in some cases. If we use obstacle or stuck point, we're equally in a quagmire. We used impasse here to just pare it down to the most neutral description of getting stuck. And then we filled in how players were experiencing that moment. We think this is a really nice way to recognize the range of ways that players are responding to impasses. We can also see from this work how a series of impasses nurtures learning over time in a way that's really striking and beautiful to see over the first few levels of Baba. And we can see how this relatively simple problem-solving framework of noticing discrepancies, postulating causes, and intervening actually kind of opens up the world of learning and presents a window into what's happening there. Okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to hand it over to Craig. So let me see if I can stop sharing. Thank you all. I hope that was valuable. Super excited to hang around with you all the next couple of days.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And thanks, David, for setting all this up, or setting me up to get into the next part. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different things that we've done in BabaISU with this data, just to give you a good sort of sampling of the number of things that we've gone through. So one of the things that we focused on was how do we give good hints in puzzle games? The way that we did this is we looked at how our grad students who were helping us out with the project gave hints naturalistically. So without any instructions or guidance, how did they help people playing Baba Is You when they needed it? And we found that there were a bunch of different ways that they approach helping players try to get unstuck. Some of our grad students would jump in and before the player even asked for help, almost sort of course correcting them to make sure that they were going in a productive direction. We had some that would ask questions about the mechanics the player was using when they got stuck to try to get them to think a little bit more about how the mechanics worked. Sometimes our grad students would give very cryptic hints, almost trying to lead them in the right direction, but making it a little more of a hint and less of just telling them the answer. Other times they would be very direct. They would say, "Well, let's do this. Let's try this." They would almost co-play with the players and help solve the the level with them. When we sort of looked at how they were approaching this and how the players reacted to these hints, we found that players were equally likely to either remain stuck or as they were to be unstuck and have new things to explore. So we put our heads together and consulted some of the literature across the learning sciences, game-based learning, and even some work that is directly on how to give good hints. So that we could develop sort of a guidebook of the sort of theoretical best practices for giving hints to players in puzzle games. So we based this our guidebook on a couple of core principles. First, we wanted to make sure that we were getting them unstuck as well as we could, but never giving them the answer. So not just giving away the answer when they got stuck, making sure we're giving hints that encourage them to figure out the problem themselves. We also wanted to maintain the player's autonomy, since that is one of the special things about video games is you get to kind of do whatever you want, whenever you want. So some of the principles we used there was not to jump in until they are truly stuck. They even had to voice this out loud somehow, or as well as not be doing anything novel in the game. So in both those cases, they're just sitting there. They're not doing anything new, and they're expressing that, oh man, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. When that did happen, we would use a very light touch that would encourage exploration of the problem area rather than trying to push them towards the solution. We would just kind of have them reflect on what they were doing. And we would start with their distal goals, which are sort of the overarching goals of the level. We would then move sort of down to a finer grain conceptually to their proximal goals, which are kind of the ways that they are trying to achieve that larger goal. Then we go down to their strategies, which are the approach they're taking to those smaller goals. And then finally, we get down to the mechanics. And I know that's a little confusing, so let's go through an example. So here's an example, and I'll go through what the distal goals, proximal goals, strategies would be for a player in this case. So the distal goal in the volcano level here, you would probably say most likely is to get to the other side of this lava. So their proximal goals would be the ways that they're trying to do that. So first, they have to get past the Baba Is You text. Many players don't realize that if you break the Baba Is You, you get a no you state. And that causes the game to freeze because you're not in control of anything. So first thing they need to do is get past here safely. Second thing, they might be trying to get across the lava by pushing a rock into it. We saw this quite a lot. A lot of people would push the rock into the lava, hoping that that would clear the way of the lava. So if they got stuck on this level and that was their proximal goal, that would be the point we'd intervene. We'd say, well, you're trying to get to the other side of the lava. That sounds great. That's a good goal. The way you're trying to do that is by using or pushing the rock into the lava to create a path. That doesn't seem to be working. So can you think of another way you might get over to the other side of the lava other than trying to push the rock into the lava? And that sort of pushes their attention towards still having that same distal goal, but now thinking about what are some other proximal goals that I could use to achieve that goal. Let's say that they get past that part and they decide, okay, well now I'm going to push the lava out of the way. So they're going to make lava is push. That would then become their proximal goal. Their strategy would be to make that rule. So pushing the text lava is pushed together somehow. And then finally, the mechanics that would be at play would be the is you, the rock is push, melt and hot are also in play here if they've been interacting with the lava, which are all things if they had conceptual misunderstandings about, we would drill down to those levels and finally say, well, what does melt even do? What does hot even do? Just to give them some things to think on and hopefully to get them unstuck. Okay, so when we had a researcher, myself actually, sit down with some players and give hints in this sort of guidebook directed fashion, we found a couple really interesting things. So first off, players were more likely to explore the problem space and much less likely to remain stuck when we sort of followed this procedure. We also found that it required fewer hints overall. And players even got further in the game than when our grad students were giving just hints naturalistically. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit, but so that's where we landed with our sort of hint guidebook. We are getting it out for publication here pretty soon. If you're interested in hearing more about it, we've got a couple of publications on it already. So feel free to reach out. We can get you those. So now I'm going to jump into some of the work that we've been doing more recently. So after working with Baba Is You for a couple years, thinking a lot about how do players solve problems in these spaces, we thought the best place to turn would be to think about how are these spaces built in order for players to have puzzle problem-solving opportunities and in such interesting and fun ways. So we're doing this in 3 different sort of branches. I'm going to go through the first one in close detail, simply because it is one of our biggest efforts, and I think it'll be most interesting to the community. And I'll touch on the other ways at the end of the presentation. So the first way that we're going through this is basically making a couple modifications to the first 7 levels of Baba Is You. And here we demonstrate the sort of what we're calling tutorialized version. We really just take the game as it is and then add in signposts. Like I know everybody loves having lots of text in early levels telling the player what to do. So that is the direction we push this version, to see when we try to teach players how to play a game using this method, how does it change the way that they see the puzzle, how do they learn, and how do they engage with it. So the second version that we made is an increased impasse version. So as David was talking about the impasses that we've been watching players sort of hit most often, we wondered, well, what if they hit them more? What if they had even more tangible experience with the properties of the game? Are they going to learn the rules better since they have more opportunities, more examples of, in this case, bumping to the wall as they're trying to get through the corridors that we made here? Do they come to understand the wall is stop rule better than they would otherwise? So we took these versions, these two versions, as well as the original game, to our local state fair. Our university actually has a little area set up, a little building just for us to, as researchers, go and set up experiments. You can do all kinds of, participate in all kinds of different experiments when you go to the fair here. It's really fun. And we had 75 people sit down and play one of 3 versions of Baba Is You, either the tutorialized version, the increased impasse version, or the original game. We also asked them to complete a couple surveys for us so that we could get an understanding of how they experienced it. We asked them about their engagement in the game, and this kind of bordered in between a sort of flow state in the Chikmensi Highway, where they're in inflow, and a little bit toward sort of enjoyment. So we asked them questions like, how much do you agree with these statements? I lost track of time. Playing made me feel focused. I wanted to play longer. We also asked them about how difficult these versions of the game felt to them. So we asked them questions like, how much do you agree with these statements? I found these levels difficult overall. At some point while playing, I had no idea what to do. And I feel like I understood the core concepts of these levels. We actually also gave them a little quiz just to see how well they understood the concepts of Baba Is You, where we asked questions like, which of the following makes it possible to win? Just touch the flag, crash Baba into the word win, put the words flag is win together. Or questions like, we give them a picture like of volcano here, and have them, or ask the question like, what does the rule lava is hot do in this picture? And then they would have to pick from, it destroys anything that touches the lava, it destroys rock if it touches the lava, or it destroys Baba if they touch the lava. We also used the same log data that David was talking about in the previous study, and here we were looking at a couple different events in particular. So their no you events. So how many times did they get into that no you state where they've broken Baba Is You or whatever is you at the time, and sort of gotten to the freeze, the kind of restart or undo screen. We looked at how many times they restarted the level, how long they spent in the level, and how many levels they completed. And what we found, also very interesting, the tutorialized version, unsurprisingly, this group rated their version of the game lower in difficulty. They also completed all 8 levels more often than the other groups. The increased impasse group had a lot fewer people complete all the levels before we ran out of time. Which, by the way, was they played for 20 minutes before we stopped them and asked them to do the survey. The tutorialized group also had fewer no-you states, fewer restarts, and fewer undos. So arguably, the tutorialized group had an easier time, which, not surprising. We're giving them the answer. So they just have to follow the instructions, and they will get to the end of the game, or end of those levels at least. Interestingly, we did not see a drop in engagement. We thought that taking the problem solving out of the puzzle game was going to make it less fun, make it less engaging, but we didn't find that. We found that across all 3 groups, they had pretty equal engagement, which was surprising. We found that the increased impasse group actually didn't have any differences from the original game, even though we did check that the players did in fact bump into the impasses that we sort of pumped up a little bit. They did get that more tangible experience bumping into things and playing with the rules, but it actually didn't result in any changes in their engagement, the difficulty, or even their sort of game metrics. And finally, all 3 groups scored about the same on the quiz. So arguably, they all learned the rules at about the same at about the same level. So what does this all mean? Of course, this is saying that this tutorialized, very explicit tutorial, players got through more easily. So obviously, we just need to embrace text-based explicit tutorials because they're clearly the future. I'm kidding, of course. Please don't roast me in the comments. What we actually found, or decided, oops, I did it again. What we actually found was that, or what we can actually say about this is, while playing early levels, this explicit tutorialization doesn't seem to take anything away from the player's engagement. We need to do more work on this to really be sure, but at least in those first 7 levels, they still enjoyed it. They still got into the game just as much as the other groups. It also didn't help them understand the mechanics any better. So arguably, you would put that sort of explicit text on the screen for players so that they would understand the mechanics and then therefore go on to the following levels with a better understanding. We found that they didn't. They actually scored about the same as everybody else. So putting those words on the screen doesn't help them learn any better than any other group. What it does do is it lowers the difficulty. Players in this group reported that the game was a lot easier. And of course, this comes with changing the feel of the game. We're by no means advocating for all games to use explicit tutorials, because that changes how they feel. Many game designers, in fact, most that I've talked to, don't want their players to feel like they're just walking them through the game, because usually it's not that fun. So what about later levels? These are some things that we can't say from this data, is we don't really know how it prepares players for the later or the levels after the tutorial. And really that's what the tutorial is for, is to get them ready for the rest of the game. But we haven't looked at that yet, but we will be soon. And why didn't we see any of the increased impasses change anything for players? They arguably had lots more tangible experience with the mechanics of the game. Why didn't they learn better? Why didn't they have a better understanding of the mechanics than someone who was just told, do this and get through the level? So what we're doing for our next study that we're currently sort of piloting out right now is adding another version in that we're calling sort of safe problem solving, or as David prefers, bumper problem solving. And what we're doing is we're having them play this version, the increased impasse version, or tutorialized version, or the regular game. And then after they get through these first 7 levels that we've modified, they're going to go into the rest of the game. So we're going to see how well do these different ways of onboarding your player, how does that prepare them for later on? So we'll see how they all get in, or we'll see how they do when they all get into the lake levels. Those ones will be unchanged. They will be the regular game, so we can see how well each of these versions sort of prepared them for the future. So that's the one of the main studies that we're working on now. Another one is sitting down with game developers. So like many of the people I'm sure that are watching today, actually, I bet you there are quite a few people watching that I've already sat down with. And it's been really interesting. We've talked a lot about sort of design philosophies, design strategies, and just different approaches to making puzzles. And if you haven't sat down with me yet, feel free to reach out. We're still looking for other puzzle developers to talk to and get more perspectives. Another branch that we're working with or working on is with a curriculum development group called 9 Dots, who is making a sort of educational version of the core principles of Baba is You, sort of teaching people about logic, and Baba is You is such a great space to do that in. They're creating a version, a clone basically that they can have people walk through more easily. And with that, that is sort of the full run of what we are working on in the future. And we've got just about 15 minutes or so to answer any questions you all have.
Okie dokie. Questions in the chat. Great talk. Thank you, guys. It's awesome. I think one of the key takeaways I got from the chat is that you've inspired people to go into research so that they can play Baba is You. I don't think it's that simple. You don't just get to play Baba is You all the time, right?
I mean, that's usually what I tell people when I tell them what I do for a living is I just watch people play Baba is You. That's it.
Alrighty, so we did have had some questions earlier. I'm not sure if maybe they would have got explained throughout, but somebody was just asking for a more specific definition of layered impasse at some point earlier in the talk.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the pure impasse we were thinking of as, the U character crashes into an impasse, hits the barrier. The delayed one was that same action happens, but after a period of time. The layered one was, and it depended, our sort of measure of it depended on the level, but it was some effort to try something at the point of contact. So maybe you'd like push a text block into the impasse at the moment that it arose, or maybe you brought a rock with you to see if the rock would protect you at that impasse site. It was some indication of the player trying something, right? Some creativity, some novel interactive dynamic at that impasse that suggested it was more than just happenstance crashing into this and not being able to get across. So it was a unique signal, and it worked really nicely on that skull level because we could really see all right, players know that these skulls are dangerous. They're doing something new at that site. So hopefully that clarifies a bit. Yeah, great question.
Awesome, thank you very much. We also have a question from Dom Camus here. David DeLiema made an interesting observation about the potential for misinterpreting the response to impasse data. How might a follow-up study improve confidence in results?
Love the question. This is a big tension, I think, in the entire field of education research. There is a reasonable obsession with big data, and learning analytics has sort of taken off, and now AI, of course. And you get a signal in this log data. It's a pretty powerful signal, but how do you pair that with the nuance of what the player is experiencing at that moment? And I really feel we are at risk of misjudging that moment and misunderstanding that moment. The path forward for Craig and I is reasonable because we're researchers. We have time for this. So we can pair it with a smaller sample and look at what is happening in players' thinking, even in their eye gaze. We've done some nice work here. So you can nuance it. My hunch is game developers are doing a lot of play testing, right? So you could pair a large sample. Maybe you're going to mine that data and see a signal that you really want to understand more. And then with a smaller sample, you look at players' thinking. But there's a lot of nuance in the back and forth between these two modalities, say, and there's big questions about resources and time constraints and really how you pair your understanding of those two that I think is emerging in the field of educational research, emerging in very complicated ways. And it would be really wonderful to understand how the puzzle development community is really navigating those two. It's a really juicy question.
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, one thing I want to underscore is the use of multiple streams of understanding. So collecting different streams of data kind of gives us a better picture of what they're doing in the game, but we're also encouraging them to talk aloud about their strategies, so we kind of get some insight into what they're thinking. Like David alluded to, we were also doing some eye gaze research where we'd actually be able to see where they're looking as they're going through the game. And all of these kind of put together give us more evidence, more more reason to argue. We have a good understanding of where they're getting stuck and that it is a true impasse.
Wonderful, thank you both. Just trying to keep an eye on all these questions. There's quite a few coming through, and there's been a scheduling mix-up. Of course, there has. So there's going to actually be a little bit more time to answer questions here. So okay. All good, as long as you two are available to answer. So Gal Green has asked, did you encounter any rage quit scenarios? Any insights about that?
Yeah, there were a couple people that while watching them go through the game, and especially when I was running the guidebook study, they wouldn't necessarily rage quit the entire game. We had, I think, one person across all the work we've done so far just quit the study altogether. Not necessarily because they were rage quitting from the game, but they just kind of said, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. But what we see more often are people who are in a level and they're kind of just stuck for a very long time. And at some point they just say, I can't do this level. And usually they just go do another one, which is one thing that we've been digging into a little bit more, especially in the interviews I've been doing with game developers on why do you open up the game so that they have multiple choices? How many is too many choices? How much should developers let players pick from to keep them on the rails of how you want the game to feel, but also not get those rage quit moments because they're stuck, they can't make any progress, and they just don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I saw that there's a talk tomorrow. I'm being unafraid of large possibility spaces that I'm super excited to check out.
Me too.
Really, really gonna be neat.
Right, the messy puzzle games talk, yeah, by Amicable Animal. Looking forward to it as well. Awesome, thank you. So, okay, so there's another question here. I think these are going to keep going. So this one, with IQ tests, you most of the time have to find the rule and then apply it to the question. Have you ever used science behind pattern recognition and IQ in the designs? I guess the designs of your studies.
Typically, no. We don't use IQ as a measure. Usually, we use the surveys that I gave a glimpse of before, and the log data to directly look at what people are doing. And if they're completing the game, then that's all we're hoping to see as an outcome measure.
I think there have been measures used in, I know there have been measures used in education research that can have a deficit residue in the way that you think about players' potentials, and we've strongly avoided that and really tried to understand, like, well, a lot of people are learning in this game. How are they doing it? How are they solving the puzzles? Like, what is it that they bring, and what is it that the level design is offering, right? For a range of ways that you can learn. The sort of first 6 levels graphic that I showed you, where people are moving from category to category, and the upshot of that is this game is robust to heterogeneity, right? You can approach it in so many ways. You could get stuck a lot early on and then emerge later. You could sort of miss an impasse early and then hit it later. It's really, I hope as a field that we can start thinking about the robustness of some of these puzzle games, and how whatever the player brings, as long as they enjoy the game and are pushing at it, that they can get through. And that's really how we've been trying to approach it. It's not to say that direction isn't fruitful, but that hasn't been the way we've gone so far.
I love those charts. It makes you realize that as a designer, you're designing for all those possible paths that somebody might go through, which is kind of terrifying. Okay, so next question. I was going to ask the same thing, or a similar thing, is how can we get access to the research in the future? I think they mean to the results of the research and the data, but maybe also just to contact you. So maybe both those questions in one.
If there is an interest in seeing the kind of research that we do on Bob As You or any other sort of puzzle games or even just video games broadly, since I'm on the Thinky Games Discord, I can share them out if that would
Awesome.
be well received, and if you show me where would it be a good place to dump them.
For now, if anybody is interested in that, there's we've made a talks forum in the Discord where there's a thread for this talk, and I guess you could share it there afterwards, maybe.
Absolutely. We'll also try to post these to our research websites. And I'll also say we are a slice of the research community looking at puzzle games. There's some really beautiful stuff out there. So please take a look at our colleagues, not connected to us specifically, but there's some really, really nice stuff out there.
And worth noting that you two and I have talked about how we can make all of this research more available to people who are making Thinky games, and hopefully we can do something around that in the future. Like doing talks like this is one way to do it, but another way would just be like letting people know about it more often.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh gosh. Can there be? Here we go. Plush Lola. Hello. Can there be learning without failure or without problem solving, just with play?
See, I would almost turn this question around and say, is it really failure? If if one of the things that David and I have been thinking about a lot is why we use the words failure and impasse, and in what settings does it lose a bit of its meaning? Some of the research that we are standing on the backs of is actually scholars thinking about how failure in video games is a very special thing. It's part of the play experience, and in fact, there's research out there that argues if a player beats a game without failing at all, they don't enjoy it. They want to have those moments where they're challenged and fail in terms of the game mechanics. So we would really have to think about in learning settings and in problem solving, is it really failure if they don't get the answer right away? Or is that, like video games, them building their understanding and challenging themselves and sort of pushing their understanding? Which
absolutely love your answer, Craig. I think the way I'd phrase it, it's really similar to Craig, is that like it is absolutely possible to learn without getting stuck. But what do you lose, right? Craig alluded to possibly like losing engagement. It's less interesting. It's less fun. And there's one more that we're really interested in. So I would really suggest looking at a researcher, Manu Kapoor. He's been doing decades of work on productive failure, right? Where it sounds like backward, but teachers are actually designing lessons so that their students get stuck. And in the short term, it looks backward, right? But actually, if you measure learning transfer on subsequent problem solving tasks, those students are actually doing better than the students who were in a productive success condition, guided along without getting stuck. In the short term, you can't see the difference, but what you lose is the long-term ability. So in the study that Craig alluded to that we're really interested in is we want to guide people successfully in those early stages and then wonder if you've taken away something important for them when they get to the lake and the harder levels. But by stripping away that problem-solving experience, are you less likely to be able to generatively explore difficult puzzles later? That's just one possible outcome. So it is absolutely doable. I think productive success, where you don't get people stuck, is the dominant model in education in probably most of the environments that we grew up in. But there are major questions about what is lost when we go that route, and what could be gained if we allow a little more latency for those stuck moments and have a longer view in mind.
Awesome, thank you very much. There's so many questions coming through that I'm gonna have to limit it at some point. So we'll probably do a couple more questions. And as I've said, if anybody wants to ask any additional questions, please head over to Discord, where both Craig and David can be found, and they'll answer your questions there. I'll go for ones that I was tagged in because they're easier to find. So Vexorian asked, could it be the folks that played the version with more tutorials were still engaged but still didn't have the same amount of fun? Or is it a different kind of fun?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. The way that we measured engagement was through that survey, really just asking them questions like how much they agreed with a bunch of statements. And, what we found was by that measure, arguably they were as engaged in the same way. One of the things that we are definitely expanding for sort of the next studies is digging more into enjoyment. So not just how into the game are you, but how much fun are you having, as well as how much do they play on their own time. So we're actually going to keep an eye on how much log data is coming in after they finish the sort of requirements for the study to see if do people in these different versions come back to the game and want to play more.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so as a last question, there's one here that I think is a fun one to end on. What's another game that you would love to study?
There are so many. One of the things that I was very lucky and got to do with our grad students was sort of a landscape view of what popular puzzle games are out there And a whole bunch really caught my eye that I really enjoyed sampling. I didn't get to play them like all the way through. But one that I hear people talking about a lot that I'm really excited to try out is the Can of Wormholes. Heard lots of people saying about or talking about how this game is doing something special in the Thinky game space. So that's probably the first one on my list where I need to, when I get some free time, pick it up and just play through it and see what it's like.
Absolutely should. Also, like in its hint system as well. It's like got a and it won the Thinky Awards Game of the Year as well. So it's another reason to check it out. David, did you want to answer that one as well?
Sure. Yeah, I love the question. I immediately go to the games that I'm playing with my 6-year-old. We've been playing puzzle games for a couple of years. So we've played Snakebird, we've played Unravel, and Patrick's Parabox, all games that my 6-year-old loves. And I've told this to Craig so many times, despite that I think very carefully about how to support puzzle solving and what it means to design puzzles. When you're seeing your own kiddo stuck on a puzzle, I over scaffold. I want to help him. I want to help him get through. And I'm really interested in those like family cultures around play. I think our generation is considerably more likely to be playing games with their kiddos than certainly my parents were, who didn't know how to navigate games. And it's such a nice moment to like establish your like culture as a family around what it means to get stuck. I love when he watches me play and I get stuck. So I'd love to look at games like that where adults and kids are playing at the same time in very casual settings and really understand what those play environments are like.
Thank you once again to Craig and David for joining us.